Fiction writers do not really write fiction. Okay, we do create characters and we make up stories that are not true. But the truth is that what writers do is they take reality, they take the truth, and they twist it just enough to create a fictional story. Today we're going to talk about how writers do that. You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world. Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction writer and my goal is to help you write better. So today we're going to talk about fiction. How do writers actually create a story out of nothing, out of something that doesn't really exist? The truth is that writers don't have to make up everything because we live in the real world, and the real world is filled with all kinds of interesting, inspiring things. And the truth is that readers really love when we actually do use real things, right? Because they can relate to it. It's something that they understand. It's not something that is so bizarre that they're not going to comprehend it. Even fantasy, even science fiction, there's a lot of real life in there that writers blend in and make it sound more believable and make it sound like it really actually could exist. And all we have to do is to kind of stretch our imagination just a little bit. Okay, so writers really do like this. And so using real things is something that we do all the time. We get inspired by people, we get inspired by places. And in fact, one of my books that I wrote as my pseudonym Laura Rios was Becoming Latina in 10 Easy Steps. And in that book, I have one of the characters is the main character's aunt. And that character is kind of not really a wild person, but she's a social activist, and she's a real in charge type of person. And she's never been married, but she sort of adopts all her nieces and nephews and tries to run their life in a way and tell them what to do and what they shouldn't do. She was based on one of my aunts. Now, my aunt was not a social activist. My aunt was not unmarried. In fact, I think she was married 3 times and divorced 3 times. So she was married many times. But what did I use then? What I used was her personality and her spirit, which again is nothing like my actual character, except for that impression that I took from my aunt and used it to create this character. So if this character had that personality, if the character had that spirit of my aunt, this is who that she would be, right? So taking real life and blending it in with your characters, or using or sprinkling that into your characters, helps you to create a character that is real, that seems real, and that the readers will look at and say, okay, this actually could be a real person, maybe reminds me of a real person. So that is helpful. So let's talk a little bit more about reality. Okay, in the real world, we are surrounded by all kinds of things, right? We have everything from animals and plants to society, larger things, right? Like societies and countries and world events, and down to the smaller things and just relationships and things that we have. So what we want to do as writers is look at this real world and say, what do we want to borrow from this real world? If I'm writing a scene that, I don't know, maybe there's a building that is on fire somewhere out there. So this has happened, right? Many places. And it's our job to kind of go out there into the real world. And if we haven't experienced it personally, to go and research it and find out and say, okay, well, let me see what happened here. How did this building go up in flames? And what happened? Who called in? Who called it in? Were there alarms? What happened? How do things happen? So we want to take reality the way it actually happened, read it, learn about it, and then at that point is when we start to twist things and change things a little bit. Okay, but we have to understand how it really happened first. At least I do. This is how I do it. I should say not every author, but I'm just giving you what I do. But I take a look at things the way they really happen sometimes, especially if I'm writing about something I have no idea anything about, right? So I will go and I'll do some research and I'll see what happened. And I will, just make sure that I understand all the little parts of it, because I don't know everything. I don't know what a firefighter would do. I don't know and I haven't been in a fire, thankfully. So I wouldn't know what's the first thing that you smell? Or do you smell something, or what happens first, right? So I want to understand really what happens. And once I understand the real world and how it really happens, I can change it and tweak it and modify it so that it fits my story and what I want to tell. And that's for that, but it's for all kinds of things. I know in the movie Avatar that if you haven't seen that, it takes place on another planet, on another world, the writer was inspired by real life, the way plants are, and the colors from real life and nature. And so you can do that if you're writing fantasy and you want to write something from another world. The oceans are filled with all kinds of cool things that we can borrow from and create creatures that don't really exist, but that we can borrow from and use if we're writing that type of story. For me, I tend to write relationship stories, so I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in human psychology. What do people think? How do people react? How do people react to each other? What makes people sad? What makes people cry? What makes people want to achieve something? All kinds of things. So that's what interests me. I do spend a lot of time just kind of listening and observing situations and people, and so that I can better understand and I can write my characters so they sound more real, and and it's more authentic. Okay, so the first thing that you want to really do as an author is really understand reality. What really is happening, because once you have a good understanding of that, then comes the creative part. Then comes the part where you're going to get to be the writer that goes in there and changes everything and makes it the way that you want it. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. Changing things. So when we change things, why do we change it? First of all, we change it because we want it to fit our plot, right? We want to add the things that make sense to our story, so that I don't want to write. And besides that, if I had a burning building, I wouldn't want just a journalistic report of the news of this is what happened. No, I want to have characters running in and out of the burning building. Might want to have somebody who's desperately trying to rescue a dog. I don't know, right? But I want to add things to it that makes sense for my story. So I'm not going to write exactly what happened. What's the point of writing that, right? So I want to be creative now. But there's other reasons why we change things. Sometimes we change things because we want to recreate reality. It just kind of depends on what you're writing. Maybe you're writing about a character who had an amazing family. And that's just part of the story. Obviously, that's not the story, but maybe the character has amazing parents, an amazing family, and everything's wonderful. Everybody loves each other, and you're actually recreating something that wasn't true for you. So maybe you had a miserable childhood, and it was full of all kinds of pain. And you want to explore what would it be to have this other type of life, right? And so you recreate that reality for your character, envisioning what it might have been in a different situation, right? Or maybe who knows? All kinds of things. Maybe something really did happen in real life, and you want to change it to fit your character, basically. But maybe just for you, right? I want to play with this idea of what it would have been like. In fact, Stephen King wrote, what did he title that book? It was JFK's, took place during JFK's assassination, but I think it was just called 1963 or something. I think that's the title of the book. But anyhow, it was a time travel book. Okay, so the character ends up being able to travel back in time, and he realizes that, wait a minute, I know what's going to happen. I know JFK is going to get shot, and what would happen if I changed it so that he didn't get shot? Like I found out like what was the plan to kill him, and I did something to intervene so that it didn't happen. So the character goes back in time multiple times, and he tries to change certain things, only to find out that really, hopefully I'm not ruining the story. I won't ruin the story because you might want to read it. But he finds out that, obviously changing things is not what he thought it was going to be. Okay, so it doesn't turn out quite as well as he'd hoped. But what did Stephen King do here? He went back and he said, well, what if it hadn't happened this way? What if I get to change things and make it different? What would it have been like then? So that sometimes is a fun thing to do, is to take a real life situation and say, well, what if it had been different? And usually things are worse, right? So in my example about, you had a terrible childhood and you want to see how it would be like if it was wonderful, usually it would be the other way around, right? Because maybe you had a wonderful childhood, but what if it had been terrible? Because that's what makes story, right? We want to see how bad things get better, how things get transformed. Usually a story about everything being perfect ends up not being as much fun to read, because we read for conflict and all of that. Okay, but that's another reason, is like changing things to see how it would have been different, and kind of playing with that idea. It's just kind of fun. All right, something else to remember about real life is that real life is full of subcultures. We have various cultures that we belong to. We belong to maybe our culture at work, or our culture, our ethnic culture, or various cultures, the mom culture, all of that, right? And what you want to include that into your stories. Maybe a character fits in or doesn't fit in, right? So The Devil Wears Prada, it goes into this subculture of publishing, and she doesn't fit in very well at first, right? Until she changes she changes who she is in order to fit in. But sometimes playing with that in real life, in fiction, is also kind of interesting. It's taking, a subculture and saying, okay, how does this fit into my story? How does my character react to being part of this subculture or being outside of that subculture? And that can be kind of interesting. So bringing that into those real life kind of groups or situations into fiction is also kind of a cool thing to do, that makes your story more interesting. So really, one of the interesting things about being a writer is that we are using real life as a model for fiction. Okay, so back when I was younger, like my very early 20s, late teens, I knew a guy who dated a friend, but the guy worked at Universal Studios, and his job was to create models, right? So he created those little miniature models, and for the various sets, so for the actual sets, and I have no idea what they did with those, but he would create the actual thing, like what the set was going to look like in the models, and then I think they used the models for filming sometimes, and sometimes they used the real sets. So but we're doing the opposite as writers, right? So our models are out there, like everywhere you look, there's inspiration, and those are our models to create the fiction, to create the story. So that's why I say, in some ways we really don't create fiction. We take reality and we pull from reality to create a story that's not true, but it's very much based in the real world. And so take advantage of that. If you don't know, what to write, be inspired by real life. Go out there and see what's really happening. Look at stories that are actually true and say, well, how can I change these stories to create a more interesting story? And that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to kind of think and envision what else could happen, what could be different here, what could you do to create a fictional story from a real event. And I think that, if you're ever having writer's block or not quite sure where to go with a story, or what, even how to start a story or what story to write, I think if you look at the real world, you will find some inspiration, and you can maybe start creating just a scene and seeing where it goes from there. Sometimes when you create a scene, your imagination gets excited and says, "Oh wow, okay, I actually could see a larger story here." So remember to use real life as your model. Twist reality just enough to write your own story. I hope this has been helpful. If it has, please hit the like button and share this with others. And also hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified next time that I have a video, which will probably be next Friday. But I may surprise you and have a video during the middle of the week sometime. All right, have a good week, and I will see you definitely next Friday.